Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. This week brings us two pretty big events, guys. First of all, this Thursday is the 4th of July, also known as Independence Day here in America. But interestingly enough, 2 days before this July holiday, which celebrates the United States declaring independence from Great Britain back in 1776, well, just before that this week, one of America's biggest and most famous superheroes is actually leaving the US to make a trip abroad, ironically enough. I'm of course talking about the upcoming release of Spider-Man Far From Home, which sees the famous web-slinger visit Europe for the first time on the big screen. Whether or not he goes to visit our former imperial leaders in Great Britain specifically is still to be seen, but Spidey certainly has been seen in places like Venice, Italy, and Prague in the movie's promotional materials. This is all just a funny coincidence, I'm sure, but it is worth mentioning. And before we get to talking about Independence Day too much, let's just focus on Spider-Man and Far From Home for today. This new movie that's coming out today as of this video's posting, July 2nd, well, Spider-Man Far From Home has been a long time coming, and it's a much anticipated sequel too, which of course puts lots of pressure on the project. And as we've seen before, and with other big Hollywood projects, things like this inevitably get woke or social justice influenced in some way, usually as a detriment to the final cut of the movie, unfortunately. But Marvel and Spider-Man in particular, they've mostly been able to stay above all this, and still deliver some of the best products the movie-going public could hope to consume. And while Marvel as a whole may have misstepped a little bit when they went all girl power with Captain Marvel, which came out in March, but they certainly made up for this when Avengers Endgame came out in April and kicked ass, becoming one of the greatest and highest earning movies of all time. And this roller coaster of a year is why the third and final Marvel movie of 2019, Spider-Man Far From Home, well, it's got a lot to live up to say the least. Not only is it following Endgame, it's also the last officially announced and scheduled movie for Marvel Studios, who's been cranking out 3 per year since 2017 now. Speaking of which, in 2017, 2 years ago, that was when the first Marvel-made MCU Spider-Man movie came out, called Spider-Man Homecoming. And I had a pretty popular and somewhat controversial video come out about it too at that time, which lays the groundwork for how the original project and the upcoming sequel have both gotten pretty woke, all things considered. The big difference here though is, and what I tried to point out in my original video is, well, I guess that point didn't seem to get across to many out there, since my original video got disliked a lot and also many reviews made about it. My point there was, I was trying to say, this is one of the movies that had SJW stuff, but still did it right and it didn't get ruined. So I don't know what got everyone so angry. Perhaps it was the somewhat over the top and attention grabbing title for the first video, which was SJW Moments in Spider-Man Homecoming. And this title has since become its own series and something I used to cover the latest and biggest Hollywood blockbuster movies. But now, for some reason, it's also become a more controversial series. For me here on YouTube as well. This original Spider-Man SJW Moments, along with many others, well, for some reason, they're the videos of mine that the haters always seem to use clips from when making videos responding to me. And I think this is pretty funny too, because you would think it would be my conservative politics or Trump supporting that would be the first thing the liberals would go to. But no, they're more mad about me calling out their comic book movies. Perhaps, and I think this is part of it, is many of these detractors are just too scared or ill-informed to engage with my more political videos. So even though those are usually the real reasons they hate us, but when they actually choose to respond in video form, they do so by replying to lower hanging fruit than that, like my reviews of Marvel and Avengers movies, for example. Regardless, the main SJW influenced part of Spider-Man Homecoming, and the most apparent part to casual viewers, is of course the casting. It's pretty diverse, as the SJWs would say, but really, we could see it's about having less white people. That's their real goal. Spider-Man himself and his Aunt May are pretty much the only white characters in the main cast of the original movie, and probably the new one. And there's nothing wrong with that either. As I stated before directly many times, I don't mind diverse casting if it's done well and the movie is good. And this has been the case for Spider-Man so far, as I loved pretty much everything about the new crew. I can still point all this out though, since it is glaringly obvious that they're going for this pro-diversity angle. Think about it. Spider-Man's got an Asian best friend, his first love interest was a tall black chick, then his bully was race bent into being an Indian DJ. Flash Thompson was originally a jock bully in Peter Parker's school, but now he's a small brown kid who likes to make mixtapes. Next, Peter Parker's main love interest, Mary Jane, she's been race bent as well, into a brown girl. This was also another point of contention in my last video though, since many wanted to split hairs here and say this Zendaya chick is not actually playing Mary Jane, since she just goes by MJ. But that was Mary Jane's nickname in the comics too, and I say, come on, for all intents and purposes, this is the MCU MJ, or Mary Jane. And anyone denying that is just trying to downplay downplay the race bending and SJW influence going on here. And finally, let's get to the news story about the new movie, because this kind of woke casting for Marvel and Spider-Man has only just begun. Next, we're going to turn to an article about how Far From Home will premiere the Marvel Cinematic Universe's first transgender actor. Yikes. Not a headline I want to read about an upcoming movie I'm looking forward to. Surely it's just the interns in the advertising or public relations department trying to get this movie attention here, throwing around this headline before its release, but regardless, we can't deny it anymore. Spider-Man's getting pretty woke here. Now, whether or not this matters and the movie gets ruined or something because of this, that's still to be determined. Spider-Man Homecoming sure pulled it off, with little to no hindrance to the end product, so hopefully Spider-Man Far From Home can too. Let's go ahead and read on in this article though and see what else they have to say. Los Angeles, June 28th, 2019. Newcomer Zach Barrick will appear in the new Spider-Man film as Marvel Studios' first openly transgender actor, whatever that means. In Spider-Man Far From Home, Barrick, once known as Caitlin Barrick, will play a school chum of the Spider-Man character Peter Parker, who is played by actor Tom Holland. In an interview with Variety magazine, Barrick said there's something very inherently trans about comic book heroes, especially those where identity and hidden identity play a role. In the latest cinematic chapter of Spider-Man, Holland plays Peter Parker, a high school student who joins his classmates on a class trip to Europe, which will see him swinging over the venerable canals of Venice instead of New York skyscrapers. Parker has to balance his life as an otherwise ordinary high school boy with his other role as an outlier superhero. Okay, a couple of things first, right off the bat. The end there sounds pretty great. I do like the premise of this movie. They got me. The idea to finally take the character out of New York City for once seems pretty cool. I mean, they kind of already did that with Avengers, but this is different. This is just Spider-Man. And I said I love the first Spider-Man Homecoming movie too, but I guess some SJW YouTubers and haters, they can't stand to see someone complain about something they like while at the same time hating on it. And it is possible, and that's what I'm going to do here. So I say if you don't like it, you can suck it. The other part of this section where the first openly trans actor joins the cast, well, this shit just really confuses me actually. First of all, this doesn't seem like a big first to me. It reminds me of how they made a big deal about Captain Marvel supposedly being the first female hero, even though there were many girl-led superhero movies before her. Also, in Marvel, previously Black Panther, that was made out to be the first black hero movie, even though, again, there were many before it, like Blade, another Marvel hero from the 90s. And as for this one being the first trans actor, maybe that is true, but maybe it isn't either. In my opinion, if a person was really trans and they really transitioned to another gender, you might not even know it. I mean, you might be able to see it, but they wouldn't tell you about it all the time. I never really got the point of saying you're trans every chance you got. Besides trying to get attention or pity points, I mean, holding on to that title doesn't really make sense. If you're transitioning into being a man, then just be a man at some point, because saying you're trans man over and over makes you a different thing. For example, Peter Parker's journey is a lot about balancing being a teenager and having this other part of your life, Barrick told Variety. And this is just so trans. It's something that I absolutely think I felt on a daily basis sometimes, especially being a trans masculine person, because sometimes there's a pressure to be a different way than I feel naturally inclined to do, because I want to fit in and I have to actively fight that instinct. But the fact of the matter is, being in this movie is so beyond incredibly meaningful, and I hope it means something to other people, Barrick added. However, the character Barrick plays is not described as transgender on screen, but Barrick said in the red carpet interview that the role is open for interpretation. She said her appearance should open up characters to be played by other transgender actors. Well, I guess that's a good sign, maybe. At least we don't have to cringe through that scene, you know, the one where our superhero has to get told what it's like to be trans or something. Yep, I bet that's coming in a shitty movie one day soon, but for now, Spider-Man seems to be safe from that. And why should a character identify as trans on screen anyway? It's not like other people identify themselves when they're out and about in the real world. I don't walk into Starbucks and say, hey, I'm a straight cisgender male, will you please make me a coffee milkshake? But apparently, and I'm not surprised, really, but it seems like trans people seem to do this kind of thing. And they think this is so normal that it should perhaps appear in movies. And I say that's absurd. I also love this part where the trans actor compares themselves to a superhero. Sure, buddy, you cutting your hair short and wearing metrosexual male clothes is really saving the world. God, give me a break. But really, this does give us some insight into the mind of a wannabe special person like this. Instead of just accepting the gender they were born as, or they could transition and become the other one, well, people like this instead opt to be somewhere in the middle, kinda. And apparently, this trans actor treats their former identity as if it was some kind of secret identity, like they're a superhero. Insane. And it makes me actually start to feel sorry for someone like this. I don't know. This guy, person, girl, them, zer, they're starting to make me empathize. I also want intersectionality, Barrick said. I'm also hoping that these characters can exist in a nuanced nuanced way. I do want to see myself represented on screen, so I do want to see a trans superhero or a queer superhero, and I want it to be hopefully someone who could draw from their experience in real life in that way, to show queer people are getting work too. But at the same time, I'm just happy these stories are being told. Marvel Studios has signaled, or virtue signaled, that it will produce more films with an LGBTQ agenda. That's weird to say. Producer Victoria Alonso and Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige have said they plan to have more homosexual characters in future Marvel productions. Wow, that's some real bullshit about representation, and also straight up literal virtue signaling. And by the way, if we wanted to have fair representation, we would try to keep things the way they are. Straight males and females greatly outnumber the gay and trans communities, which only make up like 4% of the United States. But oh yeah, that's right, the SJWs don't want fair or equal or realistic representation in movies. They want forced diversity and overrepresentation of their people, which of course means less whites and now less straights as well. And that's why Spider-Man Homecoming and Far From Home, they both have arguably the most diverse cast of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because instead of sending their Peter Parker to a regular high school, which was mostly white at the time of the first publication of the comics, well, instead of that, MCU has opted to send their new Peter Parker to an advanced tech school in the modern-day Queens area of New York City, which gave them valid justification and motivation to change up the cast a little bit and make things more diverse. And well, as I said before, I'm cool with the new crew and even some of the race bending too. Brown Flash Thompson can be hilarious, and Mocha MJ is just as hot or hotter and as sassy as the original Mary Jane. So to put them up against Tom Holland as Peter Parker and our boy Spider-Man, and I'm down to see where the story goes for sure. Hopefully this SJW casting shit was just from the PR departments as suspected, and we could get a good new entry in this series that succeeds despite this attempted SJW meddling. What do you guys think? Are you going to see Spider-Man Far From Home? What do you think about the diverse cast? Is changing a character's race inherently wrong, or is it just bad when it's forced and done for PC type reasons? Comment your thoughts on everything below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see y'all next time.